The fluorescent lights of the grand lobby cast harsh shadows across the marble floor as Miguel Santos pushed his cleaning cart past clusters of sharply dressed executives. Their laughter echoed off the vaulted ceilings of Sterling Innovations headquarters, a sound that had become as familiar to him as the squeak of his mop bucket wheels. He kept his head down, just another invisible man in a gray uniform, the kind of person people look through rather than at. But tonight would be different. Tonight, everything would change in ways he never could have imagined. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. It started with a champagne flute shattering against the pristine tiles near the elevator bank. Miguel had been wiping down the reception desk when he heard the crystal explode, followed by the sharp click of designer heels approaching. Catherine Sterling stood there, the company's newly appointed CEO, her emerald dress probably worth more than his annual salary. She barely glanced at him as she gestured impatiently toward the glittering shards scattered across the floor. "Clean that up," she said, her voice carrying that particular tone of someone who had never needed to ask twice for anything in her life. "We have investors arriving in 20 minutes, and I won't have them walking through broken glass." Miguel nodded quietly, reaching for his dustpan. His hands, calloused from years of manual labor, moved with practiced efficiency. He had learned long ago that the best response to people like Catherine was silence and compliance. It kept him employed, kept food on the table for his daughter Sophia, kept the lights on in their small apartment across town. But as he knelt to sweep up the fragments, he heard Catherine's phone conversation with someone named Richard. Her voice dripped with disdain as she spoke about the evening's charity gala, how tedious it would be, how she had to suffer through performances from people pretending to have culture. Then her eyes fell on Miguel again, and something shifted in her expression. A cruel amusement flickered across her face. "Actually, wait," Catherine said, ending her call abruptly. She stepped closer, her shadow falling over Miguel as he worked. "I just had the most delightful idea." Miguel looked up, confusion crossing his weathered features. At 52, he had the kind of face that told stories without words. Deep lines around his eyes spoke of sleepless nights and double shifts. His graying hair was neatly combed despite the long hours. There was dignity in his posture even as he knelt on the cold floor, something that seemed to irritate Catherine even more. "You know what this gala needs," she continued, her voice rising so that nearby employees began to turn and watch. "Entertainment. Real entertainment. Not the boring string quartet we've hired." She circled Miguel slowly, like a predator assessing prey. "Tell me, Mr. Santos, is it? Do you dance?" The question hung in the air like smoke. Miguel's throat tightened. He could feel eyes on him now, dozens of them, employees gathering to witness whatever spectacle their new boss was creating. He thought of Sophia waiting at home, probably doing her homework at their small kitchen table, trusting that her father would come home with his paycheck intact. I'm just here to clean, ma'am," Miguel said softly, his accent thickening with discomfort. Catherine laughed, a sound like breaking ice. "Oh, come now. Everyone can dance a little, can't they?" She turned to her assembled audience of junior executives and administrative staff. "Here's what I'm thinking. Our janitor here, if he can dance the tango, right here, right now, I'll give him a real job. Something better than pushing a mop around. Isn't that generous of me?" Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Some people looked away uncomfortably. Others pulled out their phones, sensing something worth recording. Miguel felt heat rise to his face, not from anger but from the profound humiliation of being reduced to a circus act for the amusement of people who would forget his name by morning. "I don't think that's necessary, Miss Sterling," he began, but she cut him off with a raised hand. No, I insist. Unless you're too afraid? Too incapable?" Her smile was sharp enough to cut. "I mean, I'm offering you an opportunity here. A better position, better pay. All you have to do is show me you have one refined bone in your body. Dance the tango. Right here. 3 minutes. That's all I'm asking." Miguel stood slowly, his knees protesting after hours of kneeling and scrubbing. He looked at Catherine Sterling, really looked at her, and saw something he had seen countless times before in countless other faces. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. She saw him as less than human, as a prop in her own story, as someone who existed solely to make her feel superior. He thought about walking away, about finishing his shift and going home to Sophia. But then he thought about how many times he had swallowed his pride, how many times he had made himself smaller so that others could feel bigger. Something flickered in his dark eyes, something that made Catherine's smile falter for just a fraction of a second. "You want to see me dance the tango?" Miguel asked quietly, his voice steady despite the trembling in his hands. "That's what I said, isn't it?" Catherine crossed her arms, her confidence returning. "Unless you'd rather just admit you can't and get back to your mop." Miguel looked down at his gray uniform, at the name tag that identified him simply as maintenance staff. He thought about Buenos Aires, about cobblestone streets slick with rain, about music pouring from open doorways into warm summer nights. He thought about a lifetime ago when he had been someone entirely different, before loss and circumstance had brought him here to this cold lobby in Chicago, invisible and dismissed. "I'll need music," Miguel said. Catherine's eyebrows rose in surprise. She hadn't actually expected him to accept. For a moment, she seemed almost disappointed that he hadn't simply backed down. But she recovered quickly, snapping her fingers at a nearby assistant. "Pull up some tango music on the sound system. Let's make this interesting." The assistant, a young woman named Jennifer who had always treated Miguel with basic kindness, hesitated. "Miss Sterling, are you sure this is appropriate?" "Mr. Santos is an employee, and this seems, I'm sure," Catherine interrupted coldly. "Mr. Santos has accepted my generous offer. Now get the music." As Jennifer reluctantly moved toward the reception desk to access the building's sound system, Miguel removed his cleaning gloves carefully, folding them and placing them on top of his cart. He rolled up the sleeves of his gray uniform shirt, revealing forearms marked with old scars and the lean muscle of someone who had worked with his hands his entire life. The crowd had grown larger now, perhaps 30 people forming a loose circle around the open space near the elevators. Catherine stood at the edge of the circle, her arms still crossed, her expression smug. She had no idea what was about to happen. None of them did. The music began, a classic tango that Miguel recognized immediately. It was Piazzolla, Libertango, the kind of piece that demanded everything from a dancer. Catherine had chosen it deliberately, he realized, picking something complex and challenging to ensure his failure would be complete and public. Miguel walked to the center of the circle, his worn work boots clicking against the marble. He closed his eyes for a moment, letting the music wash over him, letting it transport him back across decades and oceans to a place where he had been young and whole and unbroken by the world. When he opened his eyes, he was no longer the janitor they all knew. His posture had transformed, his spine straightening with a grace that seemed impossible for someone who spent his days bent over mops and buckets. He extended one arm, positioning himself in the classic tango stance, and began to move. The transformation was instantaneous and complete. Miguel Santos moved across that marble floor like water, like wind, like something elemental that couldn't be contained or controlled. His feet traced intricate patterns, his body swayed and pivoted with a precision that spoke of thousands of hours of practice, of muscle memory so deep it had survived years of dormancy. He moved alone but danced as though he held a partner, his arms cradling empty air with such tenderness and strength that people could almost see the ghost of someone dancing with him. The crowd fell silent. Phones that had been raised to capture his humiliation now recorded something entirely different. This wasn't a janitor fumbling through steps. This was a master at work, someone who understood tango not as a series of moves but as a language, as a conversation between body and music and emotion. Catherine's smile had vanished. She stood frozen, her mouth slightly open, watching as Miguel executed a complex sequence that professional dancers would have struggled with. His movements told a story of passion and loss, of joy and sorrow intertwined, of a life lived fully despite its hardships. Every step, every turn, every pause carried weight and meaning. Jennifer, still standing by the sound system, found tears streaming down her face without quite knowing why. Others in the crowd were similarly affected, moved by something they couldn't quite articulate. They were witnessing not just dance but revelation, the unveiling of a human being they had walked past every day without truly seeing. Miguel spun and dropped low, his body bending in ways that seemed impossible for a man his age. Then he rose with fluid grace, his arms sweeping through the air in movements both powerful and delicate. The music built to its crescendo, and he matched it perfectly, his final pose holding suspended as the last notes faded into silence. For several seconds, nobody moved. The lobby of Sterling Innovations had become a cathedral, sacred space where something profound had just occurred. Then, slowly, someone began to clap. Others joined in, the applause building until it filled the vast space, echoing off marble and glass. Miguel stood there, breathing heavily now, his uniform damp with sweat. He looked at Catherine Sterling, and in his eyes was not triumph but something sadder. Pity, perhaps, for someone so trapped by their own arrogance that they couldn't see the humanity in others until it was forced upon them in spectacular fashion. Catherine's face had gone pale. She opened her mouth twice before any words came out. Where did you learn to dance like that?" Miguel took a moment to catch his breath before responding. His voice, when it came, was quiet but clear enough for everyone to hear. "Buenos Aires, Miss Sterling. A long time ago." "But you're a janitor," she said, the words tumbling out in confusion rather than cruelty now. "How can you—" "I'm a father first," Miguel interrupted gently. "A janitor second. And yes, once upon a time, I was a professional dancer. I performed at Teatro Colón, competed internationally, taught at one of the finest schools in Argentina." He paused, his eyes distant with memory. "But life has a way of changing our paths, doesn't it?" The crowd pressed closer, hungry for more of the story. Jennifer spoke up from her position by the sound system, her voice thick with emotion. "What happened? Why are you here?" Miguel looked at her kindly. "My wife passed away 8 years ago. Cancer. The medical bills, the funeral costs, they took everything. I had a daughter to raise, and she needed stability more than she needed a father chasing dreams in dance studios. So we came to America, to Chicago, where my wife's cousin could help us start over. I took work I could find, work that paid reliably, work that let me be home for Sophia when she needed me." He turned back to Catherine, and there was no accusation in his expression, only calm dignity. "You asked me to dance, Miss Sterling. I danced. But I didn't do it for a better job or for your approval. I did it because you needed to learn something important, something that apparently nobody has taught you yet." Catherine flinched as though she had been slapped. "And what's that?" She whispered. "That every person you meet is fighting battles you know nothing about. That the man who cleans your floors might have once graced the finest stages in South America. That the woman who serves your coffee might be a published poet. That the security guard who nods at you each morning might have saved lives in another life." Miguel's voice remained gentle, but his words carried the weight of hard-earned wisdom. "We are all more than what you see in a single moment, in a single role. And when you reduce people to their circumstances, when you mock them for your own entertainment, you diminish not them but yourself." The silence that followed was profound. Catherine Sterling, Billionaire CEO, stood before this janitor who had just taught her a lesson more valuable than any she had learned in business school. Her eyes glistened with something that might have been tears or might have been the beginning of understanding. She started, then stopped. The apology that should have come easily stuck in her throat, years of privilege and entitlement making the words feel foreign. But Miguel could see her struggling with it, could see something shifting behind her eyes. An older executive named Robert Chen stepped forward from the crowd. "Miguel," he said, and the use of his first name felt significant, a recognition of personhood that had been missing before. "I had no idea. We've worked in the same building for what, 3 years? And I never—" "You never asked," Miguel said simply, without judgment. "Most people don't. And that's okay. I don't need recognition for who I was. but I do need respect for who I am now. We all do. Jennifer was crying openly now, and she wasn't alone. Several people in the crowd were wiping their eyes, affected not just by Miguel's dancing but by the grace with which he handled his moment of triumph. He could have been cruel, could have thrown Catherine's mockery back in her face, could have demanded apologies and acknowledgement. Instead, he stood there with simple dignity, having said what needed to be said and nothing more. Catherine finally found her voice again. "The job offer," she said haltingly. "It stands. If you want it. Not as a joke. But because clearly you're capable of much more than we've asked of you." Miguel considered this for a long moment, and everyone held their breath waiting for his answer. Finally, he shook his head slowly. "Thank you, Miss Sterling, but no. My current position gives me something more valuable than a better title or higher pay. It gives me time with my daughter during the years I have left with her under my roof. It gives me the freedom to attend her school plays and help with her homework and be present for the life she's building. That's worth more to me than any promotion." He moved back toward his cleaning cart, picking up his gloves and unfolding them carefully. "Besides," he added with a small smile, "someone needs to clean these floors. And I take pride in doing it well, the same way I took pride in dancing. There's dignity in any honest work, Miss Sterling. Perhaps that's another lesson worth remembering." Catherine nodded slowly, and this time when she spoke, her voice had lost its sharp edge. "I'm sorry," she said, and the words seemed to cost her something. "I was cruel and thoughtless, and you didn't deserve that. No one does." "No," Miguel agreed simply. "They don't." He paused in his work to look at her directly. "But thank you for saying so. That took courage, and I respect it." The days following Miguel's impromptu performance in the Sterling Innovations lobby rippled outward like stones dropped into still water. Someone had recorded the entire encounter on their phone, and despite Miguel's quiet request for privacy, the video found its way onto social media. Within 48 hours, it had been viewed millions of times, shared across platforms with captions like "Janitor shows Billionaire CEO what real class looks like" and "the most beautiful 3 minutes you'll watch today." Miguel knew nothing about any of this at first. He continued his routine as he always had, arriving at Sterling Innovations at 6 in the evening when most of the staff had gone home, methodically working through his checklist of tasks. Empty the trash bins on all 12 floors. Vacuum the conference rooms. Clean the bathrooms. Mop the lobby. Wipe down the glass doors at the entrance. Simple, repetitive work that left his mind free to wander, to think about Sophia's upcoming science fair project or the leaky faucet in their apartment bathroom that he kept meaning to fix. But he noticed changes almost immediately. People who had never acknowledged his existence before suddenly made eye contact. They smiled at him. They said good evening. Some even knew his name now, though he couldn't remember ever introducing himself to them. A woman from accounting stopped him in the hallway on his second night back to tell him that his dancing had made her cry, that it reminded her of her own grandfather who had immigrated from Italy with dreams that never quite materialized but who had lived with dignity anyway. "Thank you for that reminder," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "We all needed it." Miguel accepted these interactions with his characteristic grace, never quite comfortable with the attention but understanding that something larger than himself had been set in motion. He worried, though, about what it might mean. Viral fame was a fickle thing, he knew, even in his limited understanding of social media. Today's inspiration was tomorrow's forgotten footnote, and he hoped that this wave would pass quickly so he could return to the blessed invisibility that had protected him for so long. On Thursday evening, 3 days after the incident, Miguel arrived at work to find Catherine Sterling waiting for him in the lobby. She stood near the reception desk, dressed more casually than he had ever seen her, in tailored black pants and a simple gray sweater. Her usual armor of designer labels and calculated elegance had been set aside, and she looked somehow younger without it, more vulnerable. "Mr. Santos," she said as he approached with his cleaning cart. "Miguel. Do you have a few minutes to talk?" He hesitated, his hand resting on the cart's handle. His shift started at 6, and he had his routine carefully planned to ensure everything was finished by 2 in the morning. Deviations made him anxious, threw off the rhythm that kept him efficient. But something in Catherine's expression told him this was important, that she had been standing here waiting for him with a specific purpose. "Of course, Miss Sterling," he said, though he didn't move away from his cart, didn't follow her toward the more comfortable seating area she gestured toward. He had learned long ago that accepting too much familiarity from people in power was dangerous. Better to keep the boundaries clear. Catherine seemed to understand this. She stayed where she was, maintaining the physical distance he needed. "I wanted to speak with you about what happened. About the video." Miguel's stomach tightened. "I didn't share it," he said quickly. "I would never." "I know," Catherine interrupted. "And I'm not here to blame you or ask you to take it down. It's too late for that anyway. It's everywhere." She paused, seeming to gather her thoughts. "I've been receiving calls all week. From news outlets, from talk shows, from companies wanting to use the video in their marketing. Everyone wants a piece of what happened here, wants to capitalize on the moment." Miguel felt a chill run through him. This was exactly what he had feared, his life and his privacy being consumed by forces he couldn't control. "I don't want any of that," he said firmly. "I just want to do my work and go home to my daughter. That's all I've ever wanted." "I know," Catherine said again, and there was genuine respect in her voice now. "That's why I turned them all down. Every single request. I told them that what happened here was a private moment that was shared without your consent, and that Sterling Innovations would not be participating in any exploitation of it." Miguel looked at her with surprise. He had expected many things from this conversation, but not protection. Not this odd alliance with the woman who had humiliated him just days before. "Why?" he asked simply. Catherine took a deep breath, and when she spoke, her words came slowly, as though she was still figuring out the truth as she said it. "Because I've been thinking a lot about what you said. About how we reduce people to their circumstances, about how we fail to see the full humanity in others. And I realize that I've built my entire life around that kind of blindness. It's easier, you know? Easier to see people as functions rather than as individuals with their own stories and struggles and dreams." She moved slightly closer, still respecting his space but closing the gap enough that he could see the shadows under her eyes, evidence of sleepless nights. "I've been CEO for 6 months, and in that time, I've made decisions that affected hundreds of employees. I've approved layoffs and budget cuts and restructuring plans. And I've done it all while telling myself it was just business, just numbers on a spreadsheet. But you made me realize that every one of those numbers is a person. Someone's father or mother or child. Someone with a whole life that I never bothered to consider." Miguel listened without interrupting, recognizing the cost of this confession. He had seen people struggle with guilt before, had watched them wrestle with the gap between who they thought they were and who they actually proved to be in moments of crisis. It was never easy, that reckoning, and he found himself feeling something unexpected toward Catherine Sterling. Not quite forgiveness, but perhaps the beginning of understanding. "I can't undo what I did," Catherine continued. "I can't take back the humiliation or the mockery. But I can try to do better going forward. And I wanted to start by asking you what would make this right. Not the job offer, I understand you don't want that. But something. There must be something." Miguel was quiet for a long moment, his mind working through the implications of what she was offering. He thought about Sophia, about the opportunities she deserved, about the future he wanted to build for her. An idea began to form, tentative at first but growing stronger as he considered it. "My daughter," he said slowly. "Sophia. She's 14, and she's brilliant. Top of her class in math and science. She wants to be an engineer, wants to design sustainable energy systems. But we can't afford the kind of schools that would give her the best chance at that future. The public school she attends is good, but it's overcrowded and underfunded, and she doesn't have access to the advanced programs she needs." Catherine's eyes widened slightly as she began to understand where he was going. "Sterling Innovations has an educational foundation," Miguel continued, his voice gaining strength. I've seen the brochures in the break room, read about the scholarships for promising students in STEM fields. But they're always for college, for students who have already made it through high school. What about the kids who need help before that? What about the Sophias of the world who have the potential but not the resources? You want me to expand the scholarship program, Catherine said, and it wasn't quite a question. Not just for Sophia, Miguel clarified. For all the kids like her. The children of janitors and security guards and cafeteria workers and administrative assistants. The ones who are just as smart and driven as any student at the expensive private schools but who don't have the same opportunities. Create a pipeline program that starts in middle school, that provides tutoring and mentorship and access to resources that can help them compete when it's time for college applications. Catherine was nodding now, and Miguel could see her mind already working through the logistics, the costs, the implementation strategy. This was what she was good at, he realized. Not the cruelty of that night in the lobby, but this. Building systems. Creating structures that could outlast any individual moment. I can do that, she said. I can make that happen. It'll take time to set up properly, to do it right, but yes. Consider it done. She paused. And Sophia will be the first recipient. She'll have everything she needs, I promise you that. No, Miguel said firmly, surprising her. Sophia applies like everyone else. She goes through the same process as any other candidate. If she earns it on her own merit, then wonderful. But I won't have her success tainted by the idea that it was a favor, a payoff for what happened between us. She deserves better than that. Catherine stared at him for a long moment, and then something remarkable happened. She laughed, a genuine sound of delight that transformed her entire face. You know what? You're absolutely right. And the fact that you would insist on that, would protect her dignity even when I'm offering to make her life easier, that tells me everything I need to know about how she was raised. She'll earn it, Miguel. I have no doubt about that. They stood there in the lobby, these two people from completely different worlds who had collided in the most unexpected way, and something shifted between them. Not quite friendship, the gulf of their circumstances was too vast for that, but perhaps mutual respect. Recognition of each other's humanity in a way that transcended their roles and titles. There's something else, Catherine said, her tone becoming more serious. The board of directors wants to meet you. They've seen the video, obviously everyone has seen the video, and they think there's an opportunity here for the company. Good publicity, a chance to show that Sterling Innovations values all its employees regardless of their position. Miguel's jaw tightened. I'm not interested in being a mascot. I know, Catherine said quickly. And I told them that. But they were insistent, and I thought, maybe instead of fighting them on it, we could use their interest for something productive. What if you came to the next board meeting, not as some feel-good story they can exploit, but as a voice? A representative for the employees they never hear from, the people who keep this building running but who have no seat at the table when decisions are made. It was a clever idea, Miguel had to admit. Turning what could have been exploitation into something with real substance and lasting impact. But it also made him deeply uncomfortable. Speaking in front of powerful people, making himself visible in ways that went against every instinct he had developed over years of surviving in the margins. I'll think about it, he said finally. But I make no promises. That's all I'm asking, Catherine replied. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a business card, her personal contact information written on the back in neat handwriting. Call me when you decide. Or if you need anything else. Truly anything, Miguel. I meant what I said about trying to do better. After she left, Miguel stood alone in the lobby with her card in his hand, the weight of this new reality settling over him like a heavy coat. His phone buzzed in his pocket, and he pulled it out to see a text from Sophia. She had sent him a link to the video with a string of shocked emojis in the message, "Dad, is this really you?" He smiled despite himself and typed back a response. "Yes, Mija. Long story. Will tell you when I get home." Her reply came instantly. "Dad, you were amazing. Everyone at school has seen it. I'm so proud of you." Miguel felt his throat tighten with emotion. He had spent years trying to give Sophia a stable, quiet life, trying to protect her from the disappointments and losses that had marked his own journey. He had never wanted to be special or remarkable in her eyes, had been content to be simply present, simply reliable. But now she had seen him differently, had glimpsed the man he used to be before life had reshaped him into something more humble. He hoped it wouldn't change things between them, hoped she wouldn't start seeing him as somehow insufficient when he went back to being just her father who worked nights and made terrible jokes and sometimes fell asleep during movies. But as he read her message again, saw the pride in her words, he realized that maybe showing her this part of himself wasn't such a terrible thing. Maybe it taught her something valuable too, that people were always more complex than they appeared, that her own father contained multitudes she had never suspected. The rest of his shift passed in a strange haze. Miguel moved through his usual tasks with mechanical efficiency, but his mind was elsewhere, turning over everything that had happened, everything that might happen. By the time he finished mopping the 12th floor and returned his supplies to the maintenance closet, dawn was beginning to break over Chicago's skyline, painting the glass towers in shades of pink and gold. He changed out of his uniform in the small locker room, pulling on jeans and a faded jacket, transforming back into civilian Miguel Santos who rode the bus home through streets still mostly empty of traffic. The city looked different somehow in this early morning light, full of possibility in a way it hadn't before. Or maybe he was different, changed by events he still didn't fully understand. When he arrived at their apartment building, he found Sophia waiting for him in the kitchen, still in her pajamas even though it was nearly 7 in the morning. She should have been getting ready for school, but instead she had clearly stayed up or woken early, unable to wait to talk to him. "Tell me everything," she demanded the moment he walked through the door. "How did you learn to dance like that? Why didn't you ever tell me? Does this mean you're going to quit being a janitor? Are we going to be famous now?" Miguel laughed, exhausted but genuinely happy to see her enthusiasm. He pulled out a chair at their small kitchen table and sat down heavily, his bones aching after the long shift. "Slow down, Mija. One question at a time." Sophia made coffee for both of them, a skill she had learned from watching Miguel perform this ritual every morning when he came home from work. She moved around their tiny kitchen with practiced ease, measuring grounds and water with the precision she applied to everything in her life. It was one of the things Miguel loved most about his daughter, her careful attention to detail, her refusal to do anything halfway. When she set the steaming mug in front of him, she pulled up a chair close enough that their knees touched. Her dark eyes, so much like her mother's, searched his face with an intensity that made him realize he couldn't deflect or minimize what had happened. She deserved the truth, or at least as much of it as he could give her. "I was a dancer before you were born," Miguel began, wrapping his hands around the warm mug. "In Buenos Aires, where your mother and I met. I trained from the time I was 7 years old, spent every afternoon and evening in studios that smelled like sweat and rosin and ambition. My own father thought I was wasting my time, that dance wasn't a real profession for a man. But my mother, your Abuela Rosa, she saw something in me. She worked extra hours cleaning houses so I could afford better instructors." Sophia listened without interrupting, her coffee forgotten on the table between them. Miguel continued, the memories flowing more easily than he expected. He told her about his first professional performance at 19, how his hands had shaken so badly he could barely tie his shoes. He described the Teatro Colón with its red velvet seats and gilded balconies, the way the stage lights felt like standing inside the sun. He spoke about competitions in Montevideo and Santiago, about teaching advanced students who came from wealthy families but lacked the fire he had carried inside himself since childhood. "And then I met your mother," Miguel said, his voice softening. "Lucia. She was a costume designer for the company, incredibly talented. She could take simple fabric and turn it into magic. The first time I saw her, she was arguing with the choreographer about whether a particular shade of red was passionate or violent. She was fierce and beautiful and completely unimpressed by me, which of course made me fall in love with her immediately." Sophia smiled at this, having heard fragments of her parents' love story before but never in such detail. "What happened then?" Miguel took a long drink of his coffee, buying himself time. The next part was harder, the part where the fairy tale ended and real life imposed its brutal logic. We got married when I was 26. Those were good years, Mija. Really good. We had a small apartment in San Telmo, and we would walk to the market on Sunday mornings and cook together in the afternoons. Your mother would sketch costume designs while I practiced steps in our living room. We weren't rich, but we were happy. We had plans. He paused, staring into his coffee as though it might contain answers to questions he had stopped asking years ago. Then you came along, and everything was perfect. Your mother took a break from work to stay home with you, and I picked up more teaching hours to make up the difference. We talked about opening our own studio someday, a place where kids from neighborhoods like the one I grew up in could learn without having to pay the ridiculous fees the fancy schools charged. But Mom got sick, Sophia said quietly, filling in the part of the story she knew too well. Yes, Miguel confirmed. You were 6 years old. Breast cancer, stage 3 by the time they found it. The treatments were expensive, and our insurance covered almost nothing. I sold everything I could, took loans from anyone who would give them, taught classes 18 hours a day. But it wasn't enough. It was never going to be enough. His voice cracked slightly, and Sophia reached across the table to take his hand. Her grip was strong, this girl who had grown up too fast, who had learned about loss and sacrifice before most children learned algebra. Your mother had a cousin here in Chicago, Miguel continued. Ricardo. He offered to help us, said he could get me work, that the hospitals here might have better treatment options. So we came, the three of us, leaving behind everything we knew. But by then, the cancer had spread. She had 2 more years, and I'm grateful for every day of them, but they were hard years, Sophia. So hard. He had never spoken about this period in such detail before, had always protected Sophia from the full weight of what those final years had cost them. But she was 14 now, nearly the age he had been when he first understood that life didn't owe anyone happiness, that survival required sacrifice. After she died, I had to figure out how to keep us afloat, Miguel said. The medical bills were crushing. Ricardo helped me get the job at Sterling Innovations. It wasn't glamorous, but it was steady. Regular hours, decent pay, health insurance. Everything I needed to make sure you would be okay. And the night shift meant I could be there when you got home from school, help with homework, make dinner. I couldn't give you the life I imagined when you were born, but I could give you stability. I could give you presence. Sophia's eyes were wet now, tears tracking slowly down her cheeks. You gave me everything, Dad. I never felt like we were missing anything. That's because you're generous and kind, just like your mother was, Miguel said, squeezing her hand. But I saw what you were missing. I saw other kids going to science camps and taking music lessons and traveling with their families. I saw you making do with library books when you needed a computer, asking teachers for extra help because we couldn't afford tutors. And every time, I felt like I was failing you. You never failed me, Sophia said fiercely. Not once. Do you understand that? Not once. They sat together in silence for a while, the morning light growing stronger outside their window, painting their small kitchen in shades of amber. Miguel thought about all the things he hadn't said, the loneliness of those years after Lucia died, the moments when he had seriously considered giving up, the nights when cleaning floors felt like the only thing preventing him from falling apart completely. But some truths were too heavy to share even with someone you loved as much as he loved Sophia. The video, Sophia said eventually, returning to the original subject. Everyone at school was talking about it yesterday. Some kids I've never even spoken to came up to me asking if you were really my dad, if you could teach them to dance. And Mrs. Patterson, my science teacher, she pulled me aside and told me she cried watching it. She said it reminded her why she became a teacher in the first place. Miguel felt uncomfortable with the attention, as he had known he would. He had spent years cultivating invisibility, learning to move through the world without drawing notice. The idea that strangers now recognized him, had opinions about him, made his skin crawl. But he could see how much it meant to Sophia to have this moment, to see her father acknowledged for something beyond his utility as a custodian. Miss Sterling talked to me last night, Miguel said, deciding to share at least part of what had transpired. She apologized for how she treated me, and she offered to create a scholarship program for students like you. Kids who have potential but need more support than their schools can provide. Sophia's eyes widened. Really? Dad, that's incredible. Maybe, Miguel said carefully. We'll see if she follows through. People make promises when they're feeling guilty that they don't always keep when the guilt fades. But I hope she means it. Not just for you, but for all the students who deserve better opportunities. Did you accept anything from her? Sophia asked, studying his face with that uncanny ability teenagers have to read their parents. Like a different job or money or anything? No, Miguel said firmly. And I told her that if you apply for the scholarship program, you'll go through the same process as everyone else. No special treatment. Sophia nodded approvingly. Good. I wouldn't want it any other way. Then she grinned, a flash of mischief crossing her face. But I'm totally going to get it on my own merit. I've got a 4.0 GPA and I've already started designing a prototype for a home solar panel system that's 30% more efficient than current models. Miguel laughed, the tension that had been coiling in his chest since the incident finally beginning to ease. This was who Sophia was, confident without arrogance, ambitious without forgetting where she came from. Whatever mistakes he had made, whatever opportunities he had failed to provide, he had somehow raised a person of substance and character. That counted for something. You'll get it, he agreed. And you'll do amazing things, Mija. Things your mother and I only dreamed about. The rest of the morning passed in a pleasant haze. Miguel insisted that Sophia get ready for school despite her protests that she wanted to stay home and hear more stories. He made breakfast while she showered and dressed, scrambling eggs the way she liked them with cheese and peppers. They ate together at the small table, talking about her upcoming science fair project and whether she should focus on the solar panel design or her alternative idea involving water purification systems. After Sophia left for school, Miguel tried to sleep. He had been awake for nearly 24 hours, and his body ached with exhaustion. But his mind refused to quiet down, cycling through everything that had happened, everything that might happen. He thought about Catherine Sterling's offer to speak at the board meeting, about whether he had the courage to put himself forward in that way. He thought about the video circulating online, about all the strangers who now felt entitled to his story. He thought about Buenos Aires and Lucia and the life he had left behind. Eventually, he gave up on sleep and decided to go for a walk. The apartment felt too small suddenly, the walls pressing in on him. He pulled on his jacket and headed out into the Chicago morning, letting his feet carry him without any particular destination in mind. He found himself walking toward the lake, drawn by some instinct toward water and open sky. Lake Michigan stretched out before him when he finally reached the shore, gray and restless under the autumn clouds. Miguel sat on a bench overlooking the water and watched the waves roll in, one after another, eternal and indifferent to human concerns. His phone buzzed repeatedly in his pocket. He ignored it at first, then finally pulled it out to see dozens of notifications. Friend requests on social media platforms he barely used. Messages from numbers he didn't recognize. News outlets requesting interviews. A particularly persistent morning show producer who had somehow gotten his personal number and wanted him to fly to New York for a segment about everyday heroes. Miguel deleted them all without responding. He wasn't a hero. He was just a man who had danced because someone challenged him to, who had happened to be very good at something most people didn't know he could do. The fact that this had captured people's imagination said more about their need for uplifting stories than about anything special he had done. But as he sat there watching the lake, he found his mind drifting back to the dance itself, to the feeling of moving to that music again after so many years. It had been like coming home to a house you thought had been demolished, only to find it still standing, still familiar despite the accumulated dust and damage of abandonment. His body had remembered things his conscious mind had forgotten, muscle memory deeper than thought carrying him through sequences he hadn't practiced in a decade. For those 3 minutes in the Sterling Innovations lobby, he had been fully himself again. Not Miguel the janitor or Miguel the widower or Miguel the struggling single father, but simply Miguel. Complete and undivided, existing purely in the moment of movement and music. It had been terrifying and exhilarating and painful all at once, like opening a door to a room where ghosts still lived. He wondered what Lucia would think if she could see him now. She had always believed in him with a certainty he never quite managed to feel about himself. Even when they were broke and struggling, even when he wanted to give up dancing and find more stable work, she had insisted that his gift was too rare to waste. The world has plenty of accountants and lawyers, she used to tell him. But very few people can make others feel what you make them feel when you dance. I miss you, Miguel whispered to the wind, to the lake, to whatever part of Lucia might still exist somewhere in the universe. I miss you so much, and I don't know what I'm supposed to do now. I've been surviving for so long that I forgot how to actually live. The lake offered no answers, but sitting there saying the words out loud somehow helped. Grief was like that, Miguel had learned. It didn't go away, didn't get easier, but it did change shape over time. The sharp edges became smoother. The constant ache became intermittent. And sometimes, if you were lucky, beauty could exist alongside the sadness without diminishing either one. His phone buzzed again, and this time Miguel looked at it. The message was from an unknown number, but when he opened it, he recognized the sender. This is Catherine Sterling. I hope you don't mind that I got your number from HR. I wanted you to know that I met with the board this morning and got approval for the scholarship program. We're moving forward with it, and I'd like your input on how it should be structured. Would you be willing to meet with me and the education director next week? No cameras, no publicity. Just planning. Miguel stared at the message for a long time, his thumb hovering over the keyboard. He could ignore it, could maintain his boundaries and his distance. Or he could engage, could let himself be pulled into something larger than his carefully controlled routine. Finally, he typed a response. Yes. I'll meet with you. But I have conditions. Catherine's reply came within seconds. Name them. Miguel stood in the corridor outside the Sterling Innovations conference room, his palms sweating despite the building's aggressive air conditioning. He had arrived 15 minutes early for the meeting, a habit ingrained from years of service work where lateness meant immediate termination. Now he found himself pacing the hallway, second-guessing every decision that had led him to this moment. The conditions he had sent to Catherine Sterling had been simple but non-negotiable. First, no media presence of any kind. Second, any scholarship program created would be administered by an independent committee, not controlled solely by Sterling Innovations. Third, he wanted representatives from the communities being served to have voting power in how funds were allocated. And fourth, his involvement would be as a consultant, not as a spokesperson or public face for the company's charitable efforts. Catherine had agreed to everything without hesitation, which both relieved and unsettled him. People with power rarely conceded so easily unless they saw an angle, a way to get what they wanted while appearing magnanimous. Miguel had spent enough years navigating the complicated politics of wealth to know that nothing came without strings, even when those strings were invisible. The conference room door opened, and a woman in her mid-40s emerged, her gray hair pulled back in a neat bun, wire-rimmed glasses perched on her nose. She wore a navy blazer over a simple white blouse, and her smile was warm but professional as she extended her hand. Mr. Santos? I'm Dr. Patricia Walsh, Director of Educational Initiatives for Sterling Innovations. It's an honor to meet you. Her handshake was firm, her gaze direct. Please, come in. We're ready for you. Miguel followed her into the conference room, his heart hammering against his ribs. The space was dominated by a long mahogany table polished to such a shine that he could see his reflection in it. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of Chicago's skyline, the city stretched out below them like an architect's model. Catherine Sterling sat at the head of the table, and to Miguel's surprise, there were 3 other people present as well. Catherine stood as he entered, gesturing to the others. Miguel, thank you for coming. You know Dr. Walsh. This is Marcus Johnson, he runs the West Side Community Center and has been working with at-risk youth for 20 years. And this is Yolanda Reyes, principal of Lincoln Middle School on the South Side. I thought it was important to have voices from the communities we want to serve at this table from the very beginning. Miguel felt some of his tension ease. Catherine had listened to his conditions and taken them seriously. Marcus was a broad-shouldered man in his 50s with kind eyes and the bearing of someone who had seen hard things but refused to become hardened by them. Yolanda was younger, perhaps 40, with intelligent eyes and the exhausted look of every dedicated educator Miguel had ever met. "Please, sit," Catherine said, indicating the chair to her right. "Can we get you anything? Coffee, water?" "Water would be good," Miguel said, his throat dry. A moment later, an assistant appeared with a glass, setting it in front of him with a quiet efficiency that reminded him of his own invisible presence in this building for the past 3 years. Catherine opened a leather portfolio in front of her, pulling out several documents. "I want to start by saying that this meeting is just the beginning of a much longer conversation. Nothing gets decided today without consensus from everyone at this table. The scholarship program we're proposing will only work if it's built on the foundation of real community input, not corporate assumptions about what people need." She slid copies of a proposal across the table to each person. Miguel picked up his copy, scanning the first page. The heading read Sterling Futures Initiative, a comprehensive support program for underserved students in STEM fields. Dr. Walsh took over the presentation, her voice carrying the practiced cadence of someone who had given many such briefings. "What we're proposing goes beyond traditional scholarship models. Instead of simply providing money for college tuition, we want to create a pipeline that starts in middle school and continues through graduate education if necessary. The program would include academic tutoring, mentorship from professionals in STEM fields, summer enrichment opportunities, assistance with college applications, and yes, financial support for educational expenses." Marcus leaned forward, his forearms resting on the table. "I've seen a lot of programs that look good on paper but fall apart in implementation. What makes this different? What's to stop this from becoming another feel-good initiative that serves 10 kids and then quietly disappears when the publicity dies down?" It was a fair question, delivered without hostility but with the wariness of someone who had watched too many promises evaporate. Catherine met his gaze steadily. "Funding, for one thing," she said. "I'm proposing an initial endowment of $20 million, with an additional $5 million allocated annually from Sterling Innovation's operating budget. That money would be held in a trust, administered by an independent board that includes community representatives, educators, and yes, someone from Sterling Innovations, but we wouldn't have majority control." Yolanda let out a low whistle. $20 million is serious money. What's the catch?" "No catch," Catherine said. "Or rather, the only catch is that I want this to actually work. I want it to change lives in measurable, sustainable ways. And I'm willing to put my reputation behind that commitment." She paused, glancing at Miguel. "Someone recently taught me that wealth without purpose is just hoarding. That power without responsibility is just tyranny. This is my attempt to do better." Miguel felt the weight of those words, knew they were meant at least partially for him. He appreciated that Catherine didn't make this about herself, didn't turn the moment into a public redemption narrative. Instead, she was putting resources behind her stated intentions, which was more than most people in her position ever did. "How many students are we talking about?" Miguel asked, finding his voice. "What's the target number for the program?" Dr. Walsh consulted her notes. "We're proposing to start with 50 students in the first cohort, drawn from middle schools across the city with high percentages of economically disadvantaged families. Each year, we'd add another 50 in the incoming class while continuing to support the previous cohorts as they advance. Within 5 years, we'd be serving approximately 250 students simultaneously." "That's ambitious," Yolanda said, but there was approval in her tone. "Most programs start small and scale up slowly. Why go big right away?" "Because small programs are easy to ignore," Catherine replied. "They make nice press releases but don't fundamentally change anything. If we're going to do this, I want it to have real impact. I want colleges to start recognizing Sterling Futures graduates as exceptional candidates. I want employers to seek them out. I want this program to become a model that other companies and organizations replicate." Marcus nodded slowly, clearly thinking through the implications. "You'd need a substantial staff to support that many students effectively. We're talking counselors, tutors, program coordinators, administrative support. The overhead would be significant." "We've budgeted for that," Dr. Walsh said. "The proposal includes funding for a full-time staff of 12, including a program director, 5 academic coaches, 3 counselors, 2 administrative coordinators, and a data analyst to track outcomes and ensure we're meeting our goals." Miguel listened as they discussed logistics, his mind racing through possibilities and pitfalls. This was bigger than he had imagined, more comprehensive. It was the kind of program he and Lucia had dreamed about creating back in Buenos Aires, before cancer and debt and survival had narrowed their vision to just getting through each day. "What about the selection process?" he asked. "How do you determine which students get into the program?" This was the question that mattered most to him, the place where good intentions could curdle into another system that replicated existing inequalities. He had seen it happen before, programs that claimed to serve disadvantaged communities but ended up selecting the students who were already succeeding, who needed the least help. Yolanda spoke up, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had spent decades in education. "That's the critical question, and it's where most programs fail. They use standardized test scores and grades as primary criteria, which automatically excludes students who have potential but haven't had the support to develop it yet. We need a more holistic approach." "Agreed," Dr. Walsh said. "We're proposing a multifaceted evaluation that includes academic performance, yes, but also teacher recommendations, student essays about their goals and challenges, and interviews. We want to identify students who have drive and curiosity and resilience, not just ones who have already figured out how to navigate the system. And we need to be intentional about outreach," Marcus added. "The students who would benefit most from this program are often the ones whose families don't know these opportunities exist. We can't just post an application on a website and hope the right kids find it. We need to go into schools, into community centers, into neighborhoods, and actively recruit." Miguel found himself warming to the discussion, feeling the stirrings of something he hadn't experienced in years. Hope, maybe, or purpose beyond simple survival. These people were serious, were thinking through the complications and challenges with the kind of rigor that suggested this might actually work. "I want to add something to the selection criteria," Miguel said, his voice quiet but firm. "I want priority given to students who are the children of service workers. Janitors, cafeteria staff, security guards, housekeepers. The invisible people who keep institutions running but whose children often don't benefit from those institutions." The room fell silent for a moment. Catherine's eyes met his across the table, and he saw understanding there, recognition of what he was really asking for. "Yes," she said simply. "That should absolutely be part of the criteria. Dr. Walsh, make sure that's written into the selection guidelines." They continued for another 2 hours, working through details about mentorship structures, summer programming, college preparation support, and accountability measures. Miguel contributed where he could, drawing on his own experience of being talented but under-resourced, of having dreams that exceeded his circumstances. The others listened when he spoke, treating his input with the same weight as the professional educators and administrators. At one point, Yolanda turned to him directly. "Mr. Santos, I have to ask. I've been a principal for 8 years, and I've worked in education for 23. I've met thousands of parents and community members. But I've rarely met anyone who speaks about educational equity with the kind of insight you're showing. Where does that come from?" Miguel considered the question carefully. "My mother cleaned houses so I could have dance lessons," he said. "She understood that talent without opportunity is just potential that dies unfulfilled. And my wife, before she passed, she always said that education was the only inheritance that couldn't be taken away. She made me promise that whatever happened, I would make sure our daughter had every opportunity to learn and grow." He paused, his throat tightening. "I'm not an expert in education policy or program development. But I know what it's like to be smart and driven and still feel like the doors are locked. I know what it costs families when they have to choose between survival and dreams. And I know that we can do better." The room was quiet after he finished speaking. Even Catherine, who he suspected was rarely at a loss for words, seemed to need a moment to compose herself. Finally, Marcus broke the silence. "I think we have the foundation for something really special here," he said. "But I want to make sure we're all committed to the long term. Programs like this take years to show results. There will be setbacks and challenges and moments when it seems easier to just cut funding and move on. Are we all prepared to stay the course?" Everyone around the table nodded, and Miguel felt the weight of that collective commitment. This wasn't just Catherine Sterling trying to salve her conscience or Sterling Innovations seeking good publicity. This was a group of people who understood that changing systems required sustained effort, who were willing to do the hard work of building something that might outlast them all. As the meeting wound down, Catherine gathered her papers and looked around the table. "I want to thank all of you for your time and expertise today. Dr. Walsh will draft a formal proposal incorporating everything we've discussed, and we'll meet again in 2 weeks to refine it further. In the meantime, if any of you have additional thoughts or concerns, please don't hesitate to reach out." The others stood, gathering their belongings. Marcus shook Miguel's hand firmly. "It was good to meet you, brother. I'm glad you're part of this." Yolanda was next, her grip strong despite her small stature. "My school is going to benefit tremendously from this program. Thank you for pushing us to think bigger." After they left, only Miguel and Catherine remained in the conference room. She walked to the windows, looking out over the city spread below them. Miguel joined her, maintaining a respectful distance. "I meant what I said in the meeting," Catherine said, her voice softer now without the others present. "About wanting this to actually work. But I also want you to know that this isn't just about assuaging guilt or buying good publicity. What happened in that lobby, what you said to me, it changed something fundamental in how I see the world." Miguel didn't respond immediately, letting her words hang in the air between them. Finally, he spoke. "Change is measured in actions, not intentions. The fact that you're putting resources behind this program, that you're building in accountability and community input, those are good signs. But the real test will come in 5 years, 10 years, when the initial excitement is worn off and it's just the hard daily work of supporting students and families." "I know," Catherine said. "And I'm prepared for that. But I'm also hoping you'll help keep me honest. Keep us all honest. You have a perspective that none of us can replicate, and this program will be stronger for your continued involvement." "I'm just a janitor," Miguel said, and there was no self-pity in the statement, just fact. "You're a father who wants better for his daughter," Catherine corrected. "You're a man who once performed on the finest stages in South America. You're someone who understands both privilege and its absence, who can see what people like me miss because we've never had to look. That's not just anything, Miguel. That's essential." They stood together in silence, watching the afternoon light paint the city in shades of gold and shadow. Miguel thought about the path that had brought him here, from the studios of Buenos Aires to the sterile corridors of Sterling Innovations, from celebrated dancer to invisible janitor to whatever he was becoming now. Life had a strange way of circling back on itself, of taking you to places you never expected through routes you never chose. "My daughter applied for the program," Miguel said suddenly. "Sophia. She submitted her application this morning before school." Catherine turned to look at him, surprise evident on her face. "I didn't know the applications were open yet." "They're not officially," Miguel admitted. "But Dr. Walsh sent me the draft form to review, and Sophia saw it on my computer. She filled it out before I could stop her, sent it directly to Dr. Walsh's email." A smile tugged at Catherine's lips. "She sounds remarkable." "She is," Miguel agreed, pride warming his voice. "She's everything her mother hoped she would be. Smart, determined, unafraid to go after what she wants. But I need you to understand something, Catherine. If Sophia gets into this program, it has to be on her own merit. I won't allow any special consideration because of my involvement or because of what happened between us." "I wouldn't dream of it," Catherine said. Besides, from what you've told me about her, I don't think she'll need any special consideration. She'll earn her place, and she'll make the most of every opportunity the program provides." Miguel nodded, satisfied. He had said what needed to be said, established the boundaries that would allow him to stay involved without compromising his integrity or Sophia's achievements. "There's one more thing," Catherine said, and something in her tone made Miguel turn to face her fully. "The board meeting I mentioned before, the one where they want to hear from you. It's next Thursday. I know you have reservations about it, but I'm asking you to reconsider. Not to be a mascot or a feel-good story, but to speak honestly about what you see working in this building and what isn't. To be the voice for employees who don't have access to board meetings and strategy sessions." Miguel's first instinct was to refuse, to maintain his boundaries and his invisibility. But something stopped him, a small voice that sounded suspiciously like Lucia telling him that sometimes courage meant being uncomfortable, meant stepping into spaces where you didn't belong and insisting on being heard anyway. "What would I talk about?" he asked. "Whatever you think they need to hear," Catherine said. "Wages, working conditions, the way management treats hourly employees. The gaps between our stated values and our actual practices. I'm not asking you to be diplomatic or careful. I'm asking you to be honest." Miguel considered this for a long moment, weighing the risks against the potential benefits. He could lose his job if he spoke too freely, could make powerful enemies who would find ways to make his life difficult. But he could also change things for the hundreds of other people who worked in this building, who cleaned toilets and emptied trash and kept the whole enterprise running while remaining fundamentally invisible to those who made the decisions. "I'll do it," he said finally. "But I'm not going to hold back. If they ask me questions, they're going to get real answers." "I wouldn't want it any other way," Catherine replied. They shook hands, and Miguel felt the strange sensation of standing at a threshold, about to step through into territory he couldn't map or predict. For years, he had prioritized safety and stability above all else, had made himself small to avoid notice. Now, almost against his will, he was being pulled into visibility, into a role that felt both terrifying and necessary. As he rode the elevator down to the lobby, Miguel checked his phone and saw a text from Sophia. The message was simple but carried enormous weight. "Mrs. Patterson helped me finish my solar panel prototype. I think I actually did it, Dad. I think it really works." Miguel smiled, typing back a response. "That's amazing, Mija. I can't wait to see it." Her reply came almost instantly. "Will you be able to come to the science fair next month? I know you usually work Thursday nights." Miguel thought about his schedule, about the routines that had governed his life for years. Then he thought about what Lucia would say if she were here, about the choices that mattered and the ones that didn't. "I'll be there," he typed. "I promise. Nothing is more important than that." He sent the message and pocketed his phone, stepping out of the elevator into the lobby where everything had changed just days before. The marble floor gleamed under the fluorescent lights, freshly mopped and maintained. His cleaning cart waited in the supply closet, ready for another night of routine tasks. But Miguel Santos was beginning to understand that routine was just another word for choosing safety over significance, that invisible was just another word for unheard. And as he pulled on his work gloves and prepared to start his shift, he felt something stirring inside him that had been dormant for years. Not quite hope, not yet, but something close to it. The recognition that his story wasn't finished, that the chapters he thought had been closed might actually just be intermissions before acts he hadn't yet imagined. The boardroom on the 42nd floor of Sterling Innovations was nothing like the conference room where Miguel had met with Catherine and the education team. This space was designed to intimidate, with its black marble walls, recessed lighting that created dramatic shadows, and a table so massive it could have seated 30 people comfortably. Today, only 12 board members occupied the leather chairs, their expensive suits and watches catching the light as they shifted to look at Miguel standing at the far end of the room. He had dressed carefully for this moment, choosing his best pair of khaki pants and a button-down shirt Sophia had given him for his birthday 2 years ago. Next to the tailored elegance surrounding him, he knew he looked ordinary, perhaps even shabby. But he had decided that morning that he wouldn't pretend to be something he wasn't. They had asked for his voice, and they would get it exactly as it came, unpolished and direct. Catherine sat midway down the table, her expression carefully neutral. She caught his eye briefly and gave the smallest nod of encouragement. Then she addressed the room. "Thank you all for making time for this. As I mentioned in my memo, Miguel Santos has agreed to share his perspective on working conditions and employee relations at Sterling Innovations. I've asked him to be candid, and I expect everyone here to listen with open minds." She gestured to Miguel. "The floor is yours." Miguel took a breath, his hands steady despite the nervousness coursing through him. He thought of all the people he worked alongside, the night security guards and maintenance crews and cafeteria workers who would never stand in a room like this. He thought of Sophia, watching him step into discomfort for the possibility of change. "I've worked here for 3 years, Miguel began, his accent thickening slightly with emotion. "In that time, I've cleaned every floor of this building, every bathroom, every office. I've seen things you probably don't know about because they happen after you go home to your families. I've seen the single mother from housekeeping crying in the stairwell because her childcare fell through and she can't afford to miss a shift. I've seen the security guard who works 70 hours a week across 2 jobs because the wages here aren't enough to support his family. I've seen people skip meals because the cafeteria prices are too high for what we earn." He paused, scanning the faces around the table. Some looked uncomfortable, others defensive, a few genuinely attentive. "You have signs in the lobby about Sterling's commitment to innovation and human dignity," Miguel continued. "But dignity requires more than words. It requires paying people enough that they don't have to choose between rent and food. It requires health insurance that actually covers medical emergencies without bankrupting families. It requires treating hourly workers with the same respect you give to executives." One board member, an older man with steel-gray hair, leaned forward. "Mr. Santos, we pay competitive wages for the industry standard. Our compensation packages are benchmarked against similar companies." "Competitive doesn't mean sufficient," Miguel replied. "Industry standard just means everyone is failing their workers in roughly the same way. I make $16 an hour. In Chicago, that's barely survival, and it's certainly not enough to build any kind of future. Meanwhile, this company reported record profits last quarter. That gap between what you earn and what we earn, that's a choice you're making about who deserves security and who doesn't." The room fell silent. Catherine remained impassive, but Miguel could see the tension in her shoulders. He pressed on, knowing this might be his only chance to say these things. "I'm not asking for charity. Everyone I work with, we take pride in our jobs. We show up on time, we work hard, we keep this building running so that you can do whatever it is you do up here in these expensive offices. All we're asking for is acknowledgement that our work has value, that our lives matter as much as yours do." Another board member, a woman in her 50s, spoke up. "What specifically would you recommend we change?" Miguel had thought about this question during the sleepless nights before the meeting. "Start with wages. A living wage in Chicago is at least $22 an hour. Move toward that over the next 2 years. Improve the health insurance to cover mental health services and dental care, things that are currently excluded. Create clear pathways for advancement so that people aren't stuck in entry-level positions forever. And most importantly, listen to your workers. Create channels for feedback that don't require us to risk our jobs by complaining." The discussion that followed was heated at times, with some board members pushing back on costs and feasibility while others asked probing questions about implementation. Miguel answered what he could, admitted when he didn't know, and refused to soften his message for their comfort. When Catherine finally thanked him and indicated he could leave, Miguel felt drained but also strangely lighter, as though he had set down a weight he hadn't realized he was carrying. 3 weeks later, Miguel stood in the gymnasium of Sophia's school, surrounded by colorful poster boards and elaborate science projects. Sophia's display was positioned near the center of the room, her solar panel prototype mounted on a stand with detailed documentation of her design process and efficiency calculations spread out below it. She was explaining the project to a judge, her face animated with enthusiasm, her hands gesturing as she described the modifications she had made to traditional panel configurations. Miguel watched from a few feet away, his chest tight with pride. This was his daughter, brilliant and passionate and completely herself. When the judge moved on, Sophia bounded over to him. "What do you think? Do you think I have a chance?" "I think you're already winning," Miguel said, pulling her into a hug. "Regardless of what the judges decide." The evening ended with Sophia taking second place in her category, which she declared was actually better than first because it meant she had room to improve. As they walked to the bus stop, she chattered about her plans for refining the design, about colleges she wanted to visit, about the future spread out before her like an unwritten story. Miguel listened, occasionally interjecting questions or observations, but mostly just absorbing the sound of her voice, the certainty in her dreams. This was what mattered, he thought. Not the viral video or the board meeting or even the scholarship program that had been formally announced that morning. This right here, his daughter believing the world was big enough for her ambitions. A month after that, Miguel received an email from Dr. Walsh with the subject line Sterling Futures Initiative First Cohort. His hands trembled slightly as he opened it, scrolling through the list of 50 names. There, halfway down, was Sophia Santos. She had earned it on her own merit, exactly as he had insisted she should. And when he told her that evening, she cried with joy and relief and determination, already planning how she would make the most of every opportunity the program offered. The following week, Sterling Innovations announced across the company that they would be implementing a phased wage increase for all hourly employees, along with enhanced benefits and a new employee advisory council. It wasn't everything Miguel had asked for in the boardroom, but it was substantial, real change that would affect hundreds of lives. On a cool evening in late autumn, Miguel finished his shift and found Catherine waiting for him in the lobby. She held 2 paper cups of coffee, extending one toward him. "Walk with me?" she asked. They left the building together, walking toward the small park 2 blocks away where city workers were stringing lights in the trees for the coming holidays. They sat on a bench, sipping coffee in comfortable silence. "The program launched yesterday," Catherine said eventually. 50 students, 50 families whose trajectories just changed. "And it happened because you danced." Miguel smiled slightly. "It happened because you were willing to listen. To actually change instead of just feeling bad about things." "Maybe both can be true," Catherine suggested. They sat together as darkness settled over the city, 2 people who had collided in the most unlikely way and somehow managed to create something meaningful from that collision. Miguel thought about the long path that had brought him here, about loss and survival and the strange grace of second chances. He wasn't the man he had been in Buenos Aires, would never be that man again. But maybe, he thought, he was becoming someone else, someone who understood that visibility could be a tool rather than a threat, that his voice could carry weight if he chose to use it. Sophia was waiting when he got home, already deep into her first assignment from the Sterling Futures program. She looked up as he entered, her face glowing with concentration and joy. "Hey Dad," she said. "Guess what I learned today?" And Miguel sat down beside his daughter, ready to listen, ready for whatever came next. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.